Hey everyone, Joseph here. I go by Audi Snapper on the forums. As some of you may know, if you've been watching my other rebuild videos, I'm about to start the rebuild of my truck. But before I do, I have a handful of little tasks I need to perform before I can fully commit to the rebuild. One of those tasks is to remove a small amount of material from each side of the front lower control arms where they make contact with the truck cage. Now, some of you may be wondering why on earth I would do that. Well, I do that so that I can add washers with various thicknesses in between the control arms and the cage mounting point to help take out, some of the slop between the two. And I find that it also prevents wear and tear on the control arms and cage mounting points when I use, plastic washers. So today's video is going to be a quick demonstration on how I go about removing a small amount of material using an ordinary drill press, in this case a 2/3 horsepower Craftsman drill press, a vise, and two tools. I don't necessarily recommend this technique for everyone, but if you have some confidence in your drill press skills and you are only removing a small amount of material like I am here, then the process could work for you too. Typically, this kind of work is done on a mill. If you don't know what a mill is, do a quick Google search and you'll find that a mill is typically an upright drill press looking machine, but on steroids, and with a lot of advantages like a table or platform that can move front to back on the y-axis, left to right on the x-axis, as well as having an adjustable up and down and rotating z-axis. I was fortunate to have one in my dad's garage growing up, so I'm somewhat familiar with how they work and what they can do. For a task like this, an end mill is the perfect tool to remove the material from the control arms. In this case, I have a 4-fluted end mill, but there are many different kinds of end mills out there for different tasks. This end mill has a flat bottom, so it can remove material as it passes across or is plunged down into the material that is cutting. So for the rebuild, I'm using these new to me gull wing lower control arms by Metal Concepts, which by the way are now distributed by 949 Designs, link in the description below. And I need to cut in the recess similar to how I did it on the lower control arms I used in the original build. I really only need two tools and a drill press to do this. First, I need a drill bit that fits the diameter of the hole in the control arms so that I can align the control arm with the chuck of the drill press. Once the control arm is in the vise and aligned with the center of the chuck, the only other tool I need is the end mill that we talked about a few minutes ago, which will do the cutting of the material that needs to be removed. So let's take a look at my process, which by the way won't be super precise or accurate, but it really doesn't need to be for something like this. In the end, the control arm needs to pivot freely and without binding. So one of the first steps is to get the vise mounted to the drill press table in a way that it will hold the control arm in the right location. So for this, as you can see, I use C-clamps to clamp the vise to the table after it's been roughly, positioned close to where it needs to be. And since the drill press table is not flat on the underside, it's sort of a cast, metal steel, I use a block of wood as a flat surface so that the C-clamps have something flat to grab onto. One of the more important things to do during this setup is to make sure that the height of the table works for the end mill and the drill bit while the control arm is in the vise, because the table doesn't stay locked in the X and Y axis like a real mill would when trying to move the table up on the Z-axis, and so I need to keep the table locked in its position during the entire process. The other important step in this process is making sure that the vise is left slightly loose as you clamp the control arm in place during the alignment process so that everything is aligned before you tighten the C-clamps. And you'll see what I mean as I go through the next few steps. So as you can see, I have the drill bit mounted in the drill press chuck, and the control arm is freely floating, sliding up and down. What you may not be able to see is that the face of the control arm already aligns with the face of the fixed part of the vise. This is important because once the vise is clamped down on the control arm, we don't want the drill bit to bind up. So as I push down on the drill press arm, the control arm and the drill bit slide smoothly down into the vise. It's important that the drill bit go all the way through both the top and bottom portions of the control arm. Using only one hole could allow the control arm to be slightly tilted once the vise is tightened and can cause the end mill to cut a sloped recess into the arm. Once I'm happy with the alignment, I can clamp the vise and tighten the C-clamps if they aren't already tightened. Once everything is tightened, the drill bit and the drill press chuck should now be centered with the hole of the control arm. This is important because when I replace the drill bit with the end mill will also be centered with the hole and the pivot point of the control arm and will ultimately allow the washer to sit down in the center of the newly created recess. The next step is to remove the drill bit and replace it with the end mill. You'll need to open up the chuck quite a bit so that both the drill bit and the end mill can be slipped up into the chuck at an angle. And this is because the chuck is so close to the control arm that there's not really enough room for you to do this easily. Once you have the end mill in the chuck, position it about 1/4 to roughly 1/2 inch away from the control arm and use the chuck key to tighten it down. So now we have an end mill that is centered on the hole or pivot point of the control arm and is perpendicular to the face of the control arm. The tricky part is how deep to go with the end mill when cutting. The washers that I use vary from 0.3 to roughly 0.5 millimeter thick, and because the drill press doesn't have an accurate way to measure the depth of the cut like a milling machine does, this is going to be a very non-precise technique, and I'll end up gauging the depth of the recess by placing the washer in the recess to see how it feels. I'm sure there are better ways to measure the cut, but again, it's not that critical for this application. Now that everything is lined up and the end mill is chucked up, let's do a first pass on this side of the control arm and see how it goes. I'm adding some oil, which is actually gear oil, to help with the cutting. It's probably not the best oil or even necessary, but it's a habit I got into back when I did use a mill and a lathe. Also, double and triple check that the vise and the clamps are tight before you start cutting. Again, this is a drill press and not designed for this sort of cutting application like a milling machine would be. So if you do try this at home, be sure to take very, very small cuts on your first pass to get a feel for it, and make sure you take your time. Let's blow this off and check the progress of the cutting. We are definitely getting close, but not there just yet. Let's get this off and do another pass, and I think we'll be good. Adding in a bit more oil for lubrication, I think it really helps the cutting process, but again, I don't know that it's 100% necessary. That should be good. So as you can see, the end mill cut a nice clean 0.5 millimeter, recess into this side of the control arm. I think it turned out pretty well. So that is more or less the process on how I do some, very minor machining on these metal parts. I know this technique isn't for everyone, but I hope that sharing this with you all will benefit some of you on your next build. Sometimes seeing how someone else does it may help you explore new techniques on your own, and to do something you didn't think was doable for your own build. This process isn't really that hard. It takes a little practice to get the drill press, the vise, the wood and C-clamps, the drill bit, and the part you are machining all lined up. But once you do, you'll find that the technique can be applied to other similar tasks using the drill press. Remember, these drill presses weren't designed for this application, so you need to go easy when cutting. Take small cuts and be patient. Anyway, I hope this video was helpful to some of you out there. If you like these style videos, let me know in the comments section below, and if you aren't already, subscribe and hit that bell icon to get notified of future videos. And as always, if you have any questions about this process or other parts of this video, be sure to post them and I will respond quickly as always. Until the next video, everyone.